We lecture now on René Descartes and his system of philosophical dualism. René Descartes sought nothing less than to reconstruct all of human knowledge. His work, called Cartesian philosophy, from his name in Latin, Cartesius, became the great challenge to Aristotelian scholasticism in the 17th century, above all on the European continent. René Descartes spoke to the ultimate dream of Western philosophy that had been articulated by Plato in his allegory of the cave in the Republic, where human beings were portrayed as sitting in a cave, seeing merely the reflections on the wall of that cave as objects passed by on the exterior. We were creatures of the cave of human experience. All things were known to us only in that experience. We saw only the shadows of things on the walls of the cave of our experience. In Plato's allegory, the philosopher, the ideal philosopher, is the being who steps out of that cave and sees and knows directly things in themselves, things as they really are. Would such a philosopher be treated as a madman, describing those things to the occupants of the cave? Would such a philosopher be blinded by the light outside of that cave? Descartes' own dream for himself and his philosophy was nothing less than perfect knowledge of being, knowing things in themselves, what they truly were, not how they appeared in our experience, and perfect knowledge of causes, why and how things happened in this world in which we found ourselves. And the appeal of the system that arose from Descartes' dream of perfect knowledge was both to rationalist and to mystical theologians and to mechanistic science and students of physics and physiology. The appeal of his system went across the entire spectrum of European interests and thoughts and commitments. And so we face, among other things, the dilemma of the Cartesian drama. Why does a thinker come to define so many of the options of an intellectual age? Well, first, there must be many things that are vital or troubling to a given period that converge in that thinker's work. And that is very much the case with Descartes, who seemed to resolve for so many of his contemporaries the central intellectual dilemmas of their time. There are 5 primary convergences in particular to which the Cartesian response arouses very great enthusiasm. First, there is the epistemological crises of the Reformation. Epistemology, as you know, is the theory of knowledge, the crisis in a theory of knowledge produced by the Reformation. There always had been ultimately in European thought a final supreme court in intellectual debate, a final location of authority, the authority of the church. The Pope in council always had been a final court of appeal. But now the debate was precisely over that claim of the location of authority. It obviously would beg the question, beg the issue of the ultimate location of authority, splitting Protestants and Catholics, to appeal either to the authority of the church or the authority of Scripture as understood by Protestants independent of the authority of the church. And that dilemma, what do you do when there are two competing claims of absolute final intellectual authority, made the question of where does one locate intellectual authority central to European minds. Very much related to this, the 16th and early 17th centuries saw the revival and the growing appeal of classical Greek skepticism, whose works were now among the bestsellers of the 16th and early 17th centuries. Skepticism as a philosophy argues that it is impossible for a human mind to know with certainty, that in logic there is always a question that is begged. In matters of experience, there always is the problem of the absence of logical necessity, and many theologians arguing on behalf of either the necessity of the authority of Scripture or the necessity of the authority of the Catholic Church and apostolic succession used philosophical skepticism to show the necessity of a location of ultimate intellectual authority beyond the practices of the human mind, and theologians themselves fed much of the growing erudite, scholarly, or just curious appeal of ancient Greek skepticism. The greatest specter of that skepticism, our third convergence, was the specter of what was called the New Pyrrhonism, after the compiler of ancient Greek skepticism at the end of the classical age, Pyrrho, who had argued that not only was nothing known with certainty, but that the proposition nothing could be known with certainty could not be known with certainty. Pyrrho applied skeptical criteria to skepticism itself. And in the revival of Pyrrho's skepticism, in the 16th and 17th century, we'll speak of Pyrrhonism as the ultimate abyss into which the human mind might fall. In Pyrrho's outlines of Sextus Empiricus, his work in which he translates and advances and explains the traditions of classical Greek skepticism, Pyrrho made central to that exposition the problem of a criterion of truth. You ask in philosophy or in any subject matter, what makes something true or false? And you make that decision on the basis of a criterion of truth. If something meets this criterion, it's true. But now we ask, what makes your criterion of truth true? And you must have a criterion for criteria of truth. But then I ask, and you see the difficulty we're going to arrive at, what makes your criterion for criteria of truth true? Or your criterion for criteria of criteria of criteria of truth true ad infinitum? And scholars, philosophers, teachers, and professors of the early 17th century were appalled by the delight that their students seemed to take of pressing these skeptical arguments against all claims of authority. And the professors began to denounce the specter of libertinism, of the young feeling freed from all principles of authority in the wake of the new skepticism. So there are three epistemological crises: of authority in the wake of the Reformation, the general appeal of classical skepticism, the revival of Pyrrhonism, and the ultimate problem of a criterion of truth. In addition, Descartes will touch two other primary obsessions of his age, the convergence of all of which account so much for his extraordinary popularity. One, the Neo-Pythagorean revival, fourth on our list, the great concern for seeing the quantitative nature of things in the universe, and fifth, the assault upon Aristotle and upon all Aristotelian authority. Thus, we may read Descartes' great book, his Meditations on First Philosophy, a work of such overwhelming influence in the 17th century, as a quest for non-Aristotelian certainty. And Descartes begins his work by saying that people who seek to refute skepticism have never made skepticism strong enough. They merely create straw men that they easily knock down. And this leaves us without a successful refutation of skepticism in its strongest form. And Descartes seeks to establish what becomes known as hyperbolic doubt, exaggerated doubt to the ultimate possible degree, going beyond even the doubt of the skeptics and their critics. Not only is there the problem of the criterion of truth, not only is there the problem that our senses present us with such different information. Our house looks larger than the sun. A twig looks straight in the air, bent in water. But Descartes, strengthening skepticism to overcome it, will argue we can't even distinguish between when we think we are dreaming and when we think we are awake. How many times has one in a dream not said, am I awake or asleep? I'm awake. But there we are with perceptions of the world and senses of certainty, and we're dreaming, and we have no means of distinguishing between the two. But his ultimate statement of hyperbolic doubt, Descartes says, suppose there were an infinitely powerful being who set out to deceive me, such that even in adding numbers between the 9th and 10th number, he deceives me, an infinitely powerful being, that in a simple, let alone a complex proof, an infinitely powerful being deceives me. If that being exists, and why couldn't such a being exist, he asks at this moment, how could I ever be free of the need to doubt everything? I could doubt whether this room exists. I could doubt whether my hand exists. I could doubt whether 2 + 2 = 4. I could doubt any geometrical demonstration. I could think of everything as illusion. I could doubt my own existence. But wait, I could doubt my own existence, but I can't, Descartes reasons. That I cannot doubt. For think, if I am wrong, I must exist to be wrong. If I am right, I must exist to be right. If I doubt, I must exist to be doubt, just as if I am certain, I must exist to be certain. If I think, I exist. My very posing the question in thought proves my existence. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. From my thinking, from my awareness of myself as a being who thinks, whether or not I have a body, whether or not anything else exists, that is indubitable. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore thought exists. That is indubitable. There is a proposition beyond all skepticism. It cannot be doubted. And if I discover why it cannot be doubted, I will have a criterion of truth. Well, why can't I doubt it? One, it is clear, meaning for Descartes, it is self-evident. As soon as the mind sees it, it knows that it must be true and cannot be doubted. And two, it is distinct. That is, its truth depends upon no other thing being true, no other thing that might be doubtful being true. It is a clear and distinct idea. So now I know against the skeptics that if I build knowledge on a sequence of clear and distinct ideas, I can know truth in the world. At this moment of his system, Descartes needs to prove God and the human soul to satisfy the demands of Christian philosophy and to fix certainty within his system. The proof of soul, he believes, follows immediately from the cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I exist, therefore a thinking being exists. My body might be an illusion, a dream. I might not have a hand, arms, legs, but there is thought, and that thought exists independent of body, independent of matter, which might be an illusion. Therefore, there exists something independent of body, independent of matter. Soul, whose essence is thought. But what about the possibility of this infinitely great deceiver that would get in the way of all further knowledge of the world beyond what's just been established? And so Descartes seeks clear and distinct proof of the existence of God, offering two proofs. One, it is clear and distinct that there cannot be more reality in an effect than in the cause of that effect. I have in my mind the idea of a perfect being. It's there in my mind, the idea of God. I'm exploring whether it's true or false, whether such a being exists. But I have the idea of God in my mind as an infinitely perfect being. But I already know that I am not perfect, that my mind can err, can have illusions. Where could the idea of an infinitely perfect being, the object represented to me by my idea of God, come from except from an infinitely perfect being? the idea couldn't come from anything finite or imperfect. If I see a painting that represents an object, I know that there must be at least as much reality out there as what is represented by the object. But in this case, the reality that's represented is infinitely perfect being. It must exist. Secondly, it is clear and distinct that anything that necessarily belongs to something actually belongs to it, whether or not such an entity exists. For example, a unicorn has one horn. That's what a unicorn is. I don't know if unicorns exist, but a unicorn has one horn. Otherwise, it's a self-contradiction. It wouldn't be a unicorn. A triangle has 3 angles. I don't yet know if a triangle exists. It might not. But a triangle has 3 angles, whether it exists or not. I wouldn't know what it was if it did exist, if I didn't already know that. A triangle has 3 angles, but I don't know if triangles exist. A unicorn has 1 horn. Now I ask about a perfect being. Would a perfect being have goodness or evil? It would have goodness. It would have infinite goodness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be perfect. Would it have wisdom or ignorance? Well, to be a perfect being, as for a unicorn to be a unicorn, a perfect being must have wisdom, not ignorance. Existence or non-existence. A perfect being must have existence. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a perfect being. Therefore, to say that a perfect being necessarily has existence is to say a perfect being necessarily exists with the same full logical force that a triangle must have 3 angles, a unicorn must have 1 horn, but neither need have existence. A perfect being must have existence. In fact, the non-existence of a perfect being would be a logical self-contradiction. So now I know that there exists a perfect being, infinitely good, infinitely wise, infinitely loving, with necessary existence, and I have eliminated the self-contradiction of the infinitely evil being. That would be a self-contradiction in terms, whom I had first posited as my possible deceiver. That is the metaphysical side of Descartes. But there follows from this a distinction between mind and body and a physics, Cartesian physics, that causes at least as much excitement in the 17th century as his metaphysics. Once I know that God, being perfect, is not a deceiver, and I think, well, what if this world were an illusion? I would be truly the victim of the most evil deceiver of all. For if there is anything certain to me, it is that there exists a world apart from my mind. What I need is a clear and distinct idea of it. The essence of soul is thought. Body exists. Now, what must exist for body to exist? What is a clear and distinct idea of it? And for Descartes, the answer is extension in height, width, and breadth. That is body. Extension in height, width, and breadth. And what can be known about extension, about matter, about body? Here Descartes reached basically the same conclusion reached by Galileo. The physical world is dimension and occupying space. It is able to move, and the mechanisms of matter touching matter and communicating force to matter, account for the physical world. Indeed, Descartes reasoned metaphysically that given God's existence as a perfect being, his will was fixed, and having set matter into motion, he did so according to fixed mechanical laws of nature. And indeed, Descartes deduced inertia as a physical principle from the fixed will of God. Matter at rest remains at rest. Matter in motion remains in motion unless acted upon by another force. And the task of a new science was to discover the laws and mechanisms and effects of matter, mass, extension in motion, and how that would account for the physical world that we observed. The Cartesian legacy here is one of a profound philosophical dualism. God has created two distinct substances or beings. One, soul, mind, and the other, body, matter. Soul is thought and does not occupy space. Matter occupies space and may be touched. It leads in his physics to a wholly natural mechanism that deals with matter in motion, but it leads also to one profound problem that will haunt Descartes and his followers, and indeed that will haunt Western philosophy, and that is the dualism of the mind-body problem. For in human beings, soul which does not occupy space and matter which does interact. I can be pushed, that's a problem of physics, but I can will myself to raise my arm or to lower my arm. Will, soul, affecting body. There is the physiology of fear that Descartes thought we could study. We see the image of a dangerous animal, and by reflex, we are moved into flight physiologically. But will can decide, stay and protect my child. Stay and protect another person. Stay and protect my country. How do mind and body interact? But for Descartes and the Cartesians, they do interact only in man. And the Cartesians lead the assault upon what they see as the superstition of assigning spiritual causes in nature to material phenomena, which leads them to undertake an assault upon witchcraft belief that will end witchcraft persecutions in the 17th century when they are, in fact, at their high water mark. The Cartesians in one generation will end the European belief among the educated in witchcraft. Crop failure is a physical problem of plant physiology. It is not from a spell or from someone's soul. The same is true for disease and the illnesses of cattle. The world seems so clear to the Cartesians, but the problems that they face are so many. How do we explain the interaction of spirit and matter in human life? How do we explain the Eucharist, the transformation of the wafer and wine into the body and blood of Christ, if all that exists is matter in motion? What do we do with the concept of miracle if everything that happens physically happens solely by natural cause? The implications for authority of overcoming Aristotle are extraordinary. Here is a new systematic philosopher overturning the Greeks who opens up new vistas for the study of metaphysics and the study of a wholly natural physics, but there, gnawing at the center of the system, the mind-body problem. Descartes' solution that the soul observes the body at the pineal gland and communicates back and forth attracts very few. Others say God causes actions to occur in the body when mental events happen and in the mind when physical events happen. This seems to involve God in too much. And there remain two other options that will haunt Europe. One, that matter doesn't exist, that there are only the objects of mind. And two, materialism, that all mental phenomena are the behavior of body as well. With that, so much of modern philosophy. Thank you.